Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video I'm going to be lecturing you on Paradise Lost books 3 and 4. So this is a follow-up to my Paradise Lost book 1 and 2 video where I discussed the idea of Calvinism and the idea of free will and determinism in Calvinism, the idea that God knows whether we're going to be saved or damned, and everything is predestined, and how Milton's Satan is kind of rebelling against this idea, to show his individuality. So, book 3 of Paradise Lost begins as a very sharp contrast to books 1 and 2. In books 1 and 2, Milton's epic poet sort of asks to look down into the depths of hell. He asks for divine inspiration to look down into the depths of hell. Well, book 3 begins in a much different way with another invocation to the muse. Except this time, when he asks the muse for help, it's to see the light of heaven. And this is one of the most beautiful passages in literature, in my opinion. It's just incredible. Milton himself was blind. That's something I didn't mention in the last video, but Milton actually went blind close to the end of his life. So like Homer, who was also said to be a blind poet, or like Tiresias, right, the prophet from Oedipus the King, and Milton brings up his own blindness in this passage. The passage reads, and so I will just read the passage for you so you can kind of hear the beauty of this whole thing, where Milton's poet says, I need help to be able to see the divine light of God. So he says, Hail, holy light, offspring of heaven's firstborn, or of the eternal, co-eternal beam. May I express thee unblamed, since God is light, and never but in an unapproached light dwelt from eternity, dwelt then in thee, bright effluence of bright essence increate. Or hearest thou rather a pure ethereal stream, whose fountain who shall tell? Before the sun, before the heavens thou wert, and at the voice of God as with a mantle didst invest the rising world of waters dark and deep, one from the void and formless infinite. Thee I revisit now with bolder wing, escaped the Stygian pool, though long detained in that obscure sojourn. While in my flight through utter and through middle darkness born, with other notes than to the Orphean lyre, I sung of chaos and eternal night. Taught by the heavenly muse to venture down the dark descent, and up to reascend, though hard and rare, thee I revisit safe, and fill thy sovereign viral lamp. But thou revisit'st not these eyes, that roll in vain, to find thy piercing ray. And find no dawn, so thick a drop serene hath quenched their orbs, or dim suffusion veiled. Yet thought not the more cease I to wonder where the muses haunt clear spring, or shady grove, or sunny hill, smit with the love of sacred song, but chief thee Sion and the flowery brooks beneath that wash thy hallowed feet, and warbling flow. Nightly I visit, nor sometimes forget those other two equal with me in fate, so were I equal with them in renown, blind Thamyris and blind Maeonides, and Tiresias, and Phineas, prophets old, then feed on thoughts that voluntary move harmonious numbers, as the wakeful bird sings darkling in a shadiest covert hid tunes her nocturnal note. Thus with the year's seasons return, but not to me returns day, or the sweet approach of evening or morn, or sight of vernal bloom or summer's rose, or flocks or herds or human face divine, but cloud instead, and ever-during dark surrounds me. For the cheerful ways of men cut off, and for the book of knowledge fair presented with a universal blank of nature's works to me expunged and raised, and wisdom as one entrance quite shut out. So much the rather, thou celestial light, shine inward, and the mind through all her powers irradiate. There plant eyes, all midst from thence purge and disperse, that I may see and tell of things invisible to mortal sight. What an incredible passage, right? I talked to you guys before about the invocation to the muse, to tell such a tale, to tell such an epic tale, you have to call on the gods to illuminate you. Well, here's a case where the literal author is blind, right? And he asks God, there plant eyes, here plant eyes within my darkness, so that I can see the divine light of heaven. Very, as far as passages in literature go, and aesthetics and beauty, I've always thought that was an incredible, beautiful passage. If you're a person of faith, it's hard not to find value in that passage. So I will just stop crooning about it now. But Book 3 of Paradise Lost is much different than Book 1 and 2. Book 1 and 2 has always been said to be the more fun book, right? Hell, in some ways, it's much more interesting than heaven as far as the characters and the rhetoric and things like that. Here in heaven, it's mostly the worship of God, right? Everybody's worshiping God and all this good stuff. So Book 3 of Paradise Lost is that moment in which, God is kind of seeing outside of the limits of time and space. God exists outside the limits of time and space. And he's kind of seeing, Satan going up into the garden. And it's already been predestined that Satan is going to tempt Eve and Adam into falling, just like how the angels did. So the whole purpose of this book is to kind of solve the theological problem. Why is it that the demons who rebelled from God are sentenced to hell forever? But why is it that man gets another chance, unlike the fallen angels who rebelled? And I'm sure the fallen angels, some of them wish that they wouldn't have rebelled once they learned that of God's sort of omnipotent power. So this book is all about, why is it that mankind gets another chance? So they're kind of even having this conversation before Adam and Eve even make their choice to fall. So this question, this web that we're kind of entangled within then, does God set Adam and Eve up to fall, right? Are they created to fall? God knows they're going to fall, but is it God's fault that they're going to? That's the sort of theological question that's being raised. Milton has a unique answer to this. Now I will read this passage to you because it's a key passage to the entire text of Paradise Lost. But starting around line 80, God tells his Son, Christ, only begotten Son, seest thou what rage transports our adversary, whom no bounds prescribed, no bars of hell, nor all the chains heaped on him there, nor yet the main abyss wide interrupt can hold, So bent he seems on desperate revenge that shall rebound upon his own rebellious head. And now through all restraint broke loose he wings his way not far off heaven in the precincts of light directly towards the new created world, and man there placed, with purpose to essay if him by force he can destroy, or worse, by some false guile pervert, and shall pervert, for man will hearken to his glozing lies, and easily transgress the sole command, sole pledge of his obedience, so will fall he and his faithless progeny. Whose fault? Whose but his own? Ingrate! He had of me all he could have. I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Such I created all the ethereal powers and spirits, both them who stood and them who failed. Freely they stood who stood, and fell who fell. Not free, what proof could they have given sincere of true allegiance, constant faith or love, where only what they needs must do appeared, not what they would? What praise could they receive? What pleasure I from such obedience paid? When will and reason also is choice, useless and vain, a freedom both despoiled, made passive both, had served necessity, not me. They therefore as to right belong, so were created, nor can justly accuse their maker, or their making, or their fate, as if predestination overruled their will, disposed by absolute decree or high foreknowledge. They themselves decreed their own revolt, not I. If I foreknew, foreknowledge had no influence on their fault, which had no less proved certain unforeknown. So without least impulse or shadow of fate, or aught by me immutably foreseen, they trespass, authors to themselves in all, both what they judge and what they choose. For so I formed them free, and free they must remain till they enthrall themselves. I else must change their nature, and revoke the high decree unchangeable, eternal, which ordained their freedom. They themselves ordained their fall. The first sort by their own suggestion fell, self-tempted, self-depraved. Man falls deceived by the other first. Man therefore shall find grace, the other none, and mercy and justice both. Through heaven and earth, so shall my glory excel, but mercy first and last shall brightest shine. So that's a long-winded passage, but there's lots going on there as far as theological considerations go. So the line that the angels who fell were sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. So God's suggesting that he gave the fallen angels their freedom. Just because God knows what's going to happen to his creations, what they're going to do, he kind of knows their programming, right? Just because God knows their programming doesn't mean that they didn't make their own choices. Just because God knows how their choices are going to go doesn't mean that they didn't make their own choices. So the fallen angels fell because of their own pride, their own stubbornness, their own rebellion. Compare that with mankind. Mankind falls. Mankind disobeys God by eating the apple of Eden. But man is deceived. Eve is deceived and tempted by Satan, right? Whereas the fallen angels made their own choice. It was Satan who gave birth to sin and death, to sin and then death, right? Man was tricked into disobeying God. So there's a difference there. He says both man and demons were created, to think for themselves, but man was tricked, and demons weren't. So that's why demons are sentenced to hell, and that's why mankind has another chance. And of course, after that, in Book 3, this is where Christ offers to stand up and be God's Redeemer for mankind. And then the whole rest of Book 3 of Paradise Lost is sort of, everybody's celebrating, the news. Christ agreeing to die for mankind's sins. So, an interesting book as far as Book 3 goes. The question of free will and determinism is important here because, again, this question, however we feel about this question, determines how we feel about Milton's Satan. Are we sympathetic to him or not? Well, if you buy into what God is saying in Book 3 here, arguably not. So that's enough for Book 3. I shall make another video for Book 4. So we'll see you guys for that one.